You could never make me jealous. Those words weren't whispered in private, not even muttered in frustration. No, my wife Emily said them loud and clear in front of a table full of her friends, her wine glass raised like she was delivering a toast. The laughter that followed was sharp, like broken glass, and every chuckle cut into me deeper than I care to admit. I smiled to keep my dignity, but inside something snapped. That was the night I decided enough was enough. Before I go further, make sure you subscribe, hit the like button, and leave a comment telling me where you're watching from. Trust me, you'll want to hear how this story unfolds. Now back to that night. We were at a rooftop bar downtown, celebrating one of her coworkers' promotions. I hadn't even wanted to go, but she insisted, saying, "Come on, Daniel, it'll be fun." Fun for her, maybe. For me, it was the same old performance. She played the charming wife for an audience, but every joke seemed to land at my expense. How I never tried anything daring. How I was safe to the point of boredom. How predictable I was. I could take the jokes, I'd been taking them for years. But then, when someone teased her about how calm I always was, she leaned back in her chair, smirked and said, "Oh please, Daniel could never make me jealous. Not in a million years." The table erupted in laughter, glasses clinked, and my wife basked in the spotlight like she had just delivered the punchline of the century. And me? I sat there, my jaw tight, a smile frozen on my face like a mask I couldn't take off. Those words kept echoing inside me all night long. Never make her jealous? Was I really that invisible to her? I drove us home in silence, her humming along to the radio, oblivious to the storm raging in my head. I thought back to the years behind us, the anniversaries I planned, the little surprises I tried to pull off, the vacations where I worked overtime just so we could afford them. She had grown so used to me being steady, reliable, that she no longer saw me at all. Predictable, she called it. Safe, like a piece of furniture in her life that she could ignore until she needed it. But that night, I decided something important. She thought I was predictable? She thought she could humiliate me in front of everyone and I'd just swallow it? She thought I'd never have the guts to strike a chord deep enough to shake her? She was wrong. The next day, I woke up early, made coffee, and sat at the kitchen table staring out the window, replaying her words in my mind. That's when her younger sister, Megan, called. Megan and I had always gotten along. She was a few years younger, more free-spirited, and unlike her sister, she treated me with kindness. She'd often make little comments about how she didn't understand why Emily acted the way she did, why she dismissed me so easily. I'd brushed it off before, never daring to go deeper. But that morning, hearing Megan's voice, light and friendly on the other end of the line, something clicked. We talked longer than usual. She asked how last night went, and I could hear the hesitation in her tone, like she already knew Emily had said something cutting. I laughed it off, but inside I felt the gears turning. Megan was different. She listened. She asked about me, not just about my work or the bills, but about me, what I liked, how I felt. It had been years since anyone asked me those questions and actually cared about the answers. That evening, when Emily breezed through the door late again, offering no explanation, I sat there and watched her. She poured herself a glass of wine, kicked off her shoes, and scrolled through her phone without so much as a hello. I realized she wasn't even pretending anymore. Her contempt wasn't subtle, it was casual, comfortable, as if she knew I'd never do anything but sit there quietly. But she didn't know what was coming. The weekend rolled around, and Emily mentioned she had a dinner planned with some friends, expecting, that I'd stay home. The way she said it, casual and dismissive, made my blood heat. That's when the plan crystallized in my mind. I called Megan. We spoke for an hour. When I asked if she'd like to have dinner, just to talk, to get away from the noise, she hesitated only for a moment before saying yes. And so, Saturday evening, I put on my best suit, the one I hadn't worn in years, and walked into the restaurant with Megan on my arm. She looked radiant, dressed simply but elegantly, her smile genuine, her laughter effortless. The hostess led us to a table by the window, candles flickering between us, the city lights sparkling outside. For the first time in years, I felt light, seen. alive. And that's when the twist began to take shape. Because that restaurant wasn't just any restaurant. It was one Emily loved. One she had taken me to countless times, where she always knew the waiters by name and relished being seen by people she knew. I hadn't chosen it by accident. As Megan and I clinked glasses and laughed softly across the table, I knew it was only a matter of time before Emily walked in. The restaurant buzzed with the low hum of conversation, the clinking of glasses, the occasional burst of laughter from a nearby table. I sat across from Megan, watching the way the candlelight flickered across her face. She had her hair pulled back loosely, strands falling forward as she leaned closer to tell me a story about her latest work project. She laughed easily, her voice warm and unguarded. And for the first time in a long time, I wasn't thinking about how invisible I felt. I was thinking about how present this moment was. The waiter poured wine into our glasses, and Megan raised hers with a small smile. "To good company," she said. I lifted mine, meeting her gaze. "To being seen," I replied. Our glasses touched, a sharp, clean sound that seemed to slice through years of silence I'd been living under. Megan wasn't like her sister. Where Emily thrived on control, on being the center of attention, Megan was disarming in her sincerity. She asked questions and listened to the answers, her expression softening when I spoke about the little things. My love of fishing, the satisfaction of fixing up old furniture, even the books I read late at night when sleep wouldn't come. Emily had long ago stopped caring about any of that. With her, those things were met with rolled eyes or dismissive comments. With Megan, they were met with curiosity. She leaned forward, chin resting on her hand, genuinely interested. That alone made me feel a decade younger. The food arrived, steak for me, salmon for her, and we ate slowly, savoring both the meal and the conversation. Around us, other diners went on with their evenings, oblivious to the current of tension running just beneath the surface of mine. Because even as Megan spoke, even as her laughter filled the air, I couldn't help but think about Emily's words echoing in my head. "You could never make me jealous." That challenge, that arrogance, it had brought me here. But the more Megan smiled, the more she leaned in close, the less it felt like a plan for revenge and the more it felt like freedom. Halfway through dinner, Megan set down her fork and sighed softly. "Daniel," she said, her voice almost hesitant. "I don't know why Emily talks to you the way she does. I've seen it for years and I've never understood it. You deserve better." I froze, my fork hovering over the plate. No one had ever said those words to me, not even friends. Everyone saw the way Emily treated me, but they stayed silent. They laughed along, pretended it was harmless banter. Megan, though, she called it out for what it was. Her eyes held mine, unwavering, and in that moment I felt something I hadn't felt in decades. Vindication. I opened my mouth to respond, but before I could, the sound of heels clicked across the floor. A familiar voice floated through the air, high-pitched and laughing, accompanied by the chatter of her friends. My heart pounded once, hard, like a warning bell. I didn't have to turn around. I knew Emily had arrived. Of all the restaurants in the city, of all the nights she could have chosen, she had walked into this one. The same place where I sat with her sister. The same place where my laughter was no longer hers to mock. I felt Megan's eyes on me, questioning, but I didn't flinch. I lifted my wine glass, took a slow sip, and set it down carefully. The energy in the room shifted, subtle at first, then sharper. Emily's laughter cut through the air, but when her eyes scanned the tables and landed on me, it stopped abruptly. She froze mid-step. Her friends followed her gaze, their faces twisting with curiosity, then amusement, as they realized who sat across from me. Megan didn't move. She looked calm, even serene, her hands folded neatly on the table. I glanced at her, and she gave me a faint smile as if to say, "I'm here with you. Don't waver." Emily, on the other hand, stood rooted in place, her expression sliding from shock to something darker. For once, she wasn't the one in control. For once, she didn't have the upper hand. I leaned back in my chair, my body relaxed, and reached casually for the breadbasket. I broke off a piece, dipped it into the olive oil, and took a bite as though nothing at all was unusual about this dinner. That, more than anything, made the silence around us crackle. The confidence, the ease, the audacity of it, it was everything Emily had thought I was incapable of. And now, with the entire restaurant watching, she couldn't deny it. She walked slowly toward our table, her friends whispering behind her. I could see the tension in her jaw, the stiffness in her shoulders. When she finally reached us, she looked at Megan first, then at me, then back at Megan. Her voice, when it came, was low and sharp. "What is this supposed to be?" she hissed. I didn't answer right away. I let the silence stretch, the weight of her own arrogance settling on her shoulders. Finally, I set my fork down, met her eyes and said, "Dinner." It was such a simple word, but it carried the weight of everything she had ever dismissed. Her face flushed, red creeping up her neck, and for the first time in years, I saw something I thought I'd never see in her again: jealousy. Pure, unfiltered, undeniable. Megan sat quietly, her expression unreadable, though there was a flicker of satisfaction in her eyes. She didn't gloat, she didn't smirk. She simply existed there beside me, calm and steady, her presence speaking louder than any words could. Emily opened her mouth as if to retort, but nothing came out. She closed it again, glanced around the restaurant at the eyes watching her, and I could see the realization dawning on her. She had played her game too long, pushed too far, and finally lost control. The tension at that table could have shattered glass. Emily stood over us, her shadow falling across the candlelight, her breathing just loud enough for me to hear. For years she had played this game, mocking me, belittling me, daring me to show even the smallest spark of rebellion. But now, here she was, staring at me and her own sister, and she didn't know what to do. Megan, calm as ever, sipped her wine without a word. The stem of the glass balanced delicately between her fingers. I sat back in my chair, not rushing, not explaining, simply letting Emily drown in the silence she had once used so easily against me. Finally, she spoke, her voice trembling in a way I had never heard before. "Daniel, this is ridiculous. What are you trying to prove?" The words came out louder than she intended, drawing the attention of half the restaurant. Heads turned, whispers began to spread. I didn't flinch. I picked up my fork again, cut into the steak on my plate, and said, evenly, "I thought it was clear. I'm having dinner." Her eyes widened, and for once she had no clever comeback. She looked at Megan as if to demand an explanation, but Megan only tilted her head slightly, her expression calm and resolute. "He invited me," she said softly, "and I said yes. That's all." Emily's lips parted in shock, and for the first time in our marriage, I saw her speechless. It was like watching a magician drop the deck of cards in the middle of the trick. Her illusion of control vanished, scattered, gone. The silence dragged, thick and uncomfortable. Emily's friends stood awkwardly near the entrance, unsure whether to approach or retreat, their curious eyes darting between us. One of them whispered something to another, and I caught the quick flicker of a smile on their lips. They were enjoying this more than they should have, but I couldn't blame them. For years, Emily had performed her act at my expense. Tonight, the stage had shifted, and she was the one exposed. Megan leaned closer to me, lowering her voice just enough for me to hear. "You don't have to explain yourself. Not to her. Not to anyone." That quiet reassurance settled something inside me. For too long, I had been living under the weight of Emily's scorn, craving acknowledgement, fearing her ridicule. But Megan's words reminded me that I didn't need permission to exist, to be respected, to be seen. Emily's hands clenched into fists at her sides, her polished nails digging into her palms. "This is humiliating," she spat, her voice cracking. "Do you have any idea what people will think?" The irony of her words almost made me laugh. She, who had humiliated me so many times in front of others, was finally tasting her own medicine. And it was bitter. I set my knife and fork down gently, folded my hands, and looked straight at her. "Maybe now you'll understand how it feels," I said, my voice steady. Her jaw dropped slightly, but no sound came out. She wasn't used to me pushing back. She wasn't used to me standing tall. That was always her role, her arena, and I had been the silent man in the corner. But not tonight. Tonight, she was the one standing, trembling, searching for control she no longer had. The waiter approached then, clearly sensing the tension, and asked if everything was all right. I smiled politely and said, "Yes, thank you. We're fine." The normalcy of my tone only made Emily's face darken further. Megan thanked the waiter too, her voice smooth, unbothered. It was almost surreal. Two calm figures at the table, and Emily unraveling before us. When the waiter left, she leaned in closer, her voice a harsh whisper. "This is my sister, Daniel. My sister. How could you even think of this?" I met her gaze without blinking. "Because you told me I could never make you jealous," I said simply. "And you were wrong." Her face twisted with fury, and for the first time in years, I saw cracks in her armor. The arrogance, the bravado, the superiority, it all faltered. The woman who had strutted through life certain of her dominance was now off balance, and nothing she did could hide it. Megan finally set her glass down and looked at her sister. "Emily," she said softly, almost with pity, "maybe you should think about why Daniel felt he had to invite me. Maybe you should think about how you've treated him all these years." Her tone wasn't mocking, it wasn't cruel. It was matter of fact, but it cut deeper than any insult could. Emily blinked rapidly, caught between anger and shame, unable to decide which mask to put on. The restaurant was no longer just a backdrop. It was an audience. Every glance, every whisper around us added pressure, and Emily felt it. She was used to people laughing with her, never at her. Now she stood alone, her friends hovering uselessly behind her, her power slipping through her fingers. I took another sip of wine, calm, deliberate. "You always said I was predictable," I murmured. "But maybe you never really knew me at all." The words hit her harder than I expected. She staggered slightly, as if the floor beneath her had shifted. For a moment, her eyes glistened, but she blinked it away, unwilling to show vulnerability. Finally, she turned on her heel, muttering something to her friends as she walked quickly toward the door. They followed, some looking back at me with wide eyes, others shaking their heads in disbelief. The door swung shut behind them, leaving the restaurant buzzing with murmurs. Megan and I sat in the aftermath, the storm still echoing around us. She reached across the table, her hand brushing mine. "Are you all right?" she asked gently. I let out a long breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding. "For the first time in years," I said quietly, "I think I am." The evening carried on, the noise of the restaurant returning to its normal rhythm. But everything had changed. I wasn't the same man who had walked in, weighted down by years of scorn. I was lighter, freer, more certain of who I was and what I deserved. And as Megan smiled at me, steady and unshaken, I realized Emily's greatest mistake wasn't just underestimating me. It was forgetting that a man who has nothing left to lose can no longer be controlled. The night after that dinner, I lay awake staring at the ceiling, the echoes of the restaurant still vivid in my mind. For years, I had been defined by silence, by endurance, by swallowing words and letting her mockery wash over me until I almost believed I deserved it. But now the silence was gone. Emily's face when she saw me sitting across from Megan was burned into my memory. The disbelief, the shock, the anger laced with fear. She had thought herself untouchable, had thought her power over me absolute. That night shattered the illusion. For the first time, I realized that the leash she had kept me on was nothing but smoke. The moment I stopped believing in it, it disappeared. The following days at home were thick with tension. Emily avoided me at first, sulking in silence, pretending to be busy with her phone calls and errands. But the quiet didn't last. One evening she confronted me in the living room, her arms crossed tightly, her eyes flashing. "You embarrassed me," she hissed. "You embarrassed yourself. And with Megan of all people." Her words were sharp, but underneath them, I could hear something I hadn't heard in years. Insecurity. For so long, her voice had been filled with certainty, with superiority. But now there was a tremor, the faintest quiver that betrayed her fear of losing control. I didn't rise to her bait. Instead, I sat back in the armchair, calm, deliberate, as if every ounce of power she thought she had was dissolving in front of her. "You embarrassed yourself, Emily," I said evenly. "You did it the moment you decided my worth was a punchline for your friends." Her mouth opened, but no words came. She wasn't used to me answering back. I had been the reliable, predictable husband, the one who always smoothed things over. Not anymore. The arguments that followed weren't really arguments. They were her throwing accusations into the air, her voice rising and cracking, while I simply responded with calm truth. Each time she tried to twist the narrative, Megan's steady words from that night echoed in my mind. "You don't have to explain yourself." And I didn't. I owed Emily nothing more than honesty, and honesty was a weight she could no longer carry. Meanwhile, Megan's presence lingered in my thoughts. I hadn't planned for her to become part of my rebellion, but the truth was undeniable. She had stood by me in that restaurant without flinching, her calmness cutting through Emily's rage like a blade of glass. She hadn't gloated, hadn't mocked, hadn't turned the situation into a spectacle. She had simply stood there as proof that I wasn't invisible, that I was a man worth standing beside. That alone had changed something deep inside me. One afternoon, Emily stormed into the kitchen while I was making coffee. "You think this makes you look strong?" she demanded. "You look pathetic, dragging my sister into your little performance." I stirred sugar into the cup slowly, unbothered by her venom. When I turned to face her, I saw it clearly for the first time. She wasn't angry because of what I had done. She was angry because she had been proven wrong. She had said I could never make her jealous. And I had. With one dinner, I had cracked the foundation of her arrogance. I set the cup down, leaned against the counter, and said quietly, "You never thought I'd walk out of your shadow, Emily. You never thought I'd stop being your prop. But I did. And now you don't know who you are without someone to step on." Her face went pale, the words hitting her harder than I intended. She turned away, muttering something I couldn't hear, and left the room. For the first time in all our years together, she had no retort, no cutting line to put me back in place. The days stretched on, and little by little the balance shifted. Emily's dominance crumbled. She grew quiet, withdrawn, her mask slipping. And me? I grew lighter. I no longer felt the constant weight of needing to prove myself, no longer feared the sting of her words. That weight had been replaced with something else, resolve. The knowledge that I was more than the role she had assigned me. The final confrontation came a week later. We sat in the dining room, the same table where countless meals had been eaten in silence, where she had rolled her eyes at my stories, where she had delivered her careless jabs. But this time it was different. She looked at me across the table, her eyes sharp but tired. "So what now?" she asked. It wasn't sarcastic, it wasn't mocking, it was uncertain. A question from someone who realized the power she once held had slipped through her fingers. I didn't answer with threats or promises. I simply told her the truth. What now is simple. You learn that words have consequences. You learn that every time you dismissed me, every time you mocked me, you chipped away at something you thought would never break. And then one day it did. And now you get to live with that. Her eyes filled with tears, she quickly blinked away, but I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't feel cruel. I just felt free. Free from the years of silence. Free from the cage of predictability she had built around me. Free from needing her validation. When I stood and left the table, I carried with me a truth that could never be taken back. Emily had said I could never make her jealous. And yet I had. Not with anger, not with shouting, not with reckless destruction. With calmness, with quiet conviction, and with the one person whose presence she never imagined would expose her so completely, her own sister. If there's one lesson in all this, it's simple. Never underestimate the damage arrogance can do. Never believe you can mock and belittle someone endlessly without consequence. Because the person you think is safe, predictable, and invisible may one day remind you just how wrong you are. And that reminder will cut deeper than you ever imagined. Thank you for staying with me through this story. Don't forget to subscribe for more, hit the like button, and leave a comment telling me where you're watching from. I'd love to hear your thoughts.